Hey, welcome back to another live stream. Nick here, talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Looking forward to getting into another great discussion after a great couple of discussions over the last few weeks, talking about some of your questions, endurance, performance, training, a little bit on nutrition. There's been a little bit of a theme recently about carbohydrates and eating before your event, before training, afterwards as well. We had some discussions on that the other week. Hopefully you've been enjoying these live streams. If you are watching them on the replay, as always, full replay will be going up immediately after we do finish tonight. If you can't get your questions in, send them through via direct message on Instagram, which I'll actually just throw up in the bottom corner here. Just down here, you go check out Instagram. If you can't join us on these live streams when we are answering the questions as we go, send through your question over on Instagram. Send me a direct message. Make sure you're following and get the question in beforehand. I'll always get back with a written response anyway, so you get the response at the time. But it also gives us some good talking points to kick the discussion off when it does come to Wednesday live streams. So go check out NJ_sports science. Go get involved over on Instagram. Make sure you're following, and send those direct messages through to get your questions in throughout the week, and also at just other times when you're interested in something and you want to get that question answered straight away. Easiest place to reach me is through Instagram. Usually sort of checking it a few times throughout the course of the day. Compared to email and things like that, I can usually get to Instagram messages a little bit quicker. As always, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I've got a few little cool little things popping up tonight, which is kind of good. But make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Share this live stream with people you think might be interested as well, or go and watch it with someone else. Get them to jump on, get involved. We are getting very, very close. I think we ticked over today. If I look over on here now, we are exactly at 2,400 subscribers here on YouTube. Would really love to get that to 2,500. I don't think we're too far off. And if you can make sure that you subscribed, if you have been watching our videos or you're watching on the replays and you're not subscribed, please make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. Share all this content with your friends and people that you train with or who you think might be interested in learning a little bit more about the science of endurance and sports science. Get them to subscribe as well. Let's keep growing this great community we've got here, and really looking forward to getting underway and getting through more of your questions over the next little while, whether it be in a live stream or in the videos, as we have been doing. While we just wait for a few people to come in, just for the people in the replay in particular, but then also for those of you who are watching after having just joined us on the live stream, you missed these first couple of minutes. Just want to share with you a couple of the videos that have come up recently if you have missed them or haven't seen them. If I jump across to my screen share here. So a couple of the videos have been up recently, a couple of the topics we've talked about. Obviously last week's live stream is there in full, and a great number of people watching the replay, which is really, really good to see. So thanks for everyone who's been jumping on and going through, skipping through the bits. I've played around with doing some of the highlights videos. Last week I just didn't get a chance. I'm going to try and get a chance this week to maybe cut up last week's as well as maybe tonight's, depending on how many people we get in, what type of questions we go through as well. But to cut up last week's, just first week back at work, we were extremely busy, did a massive week worth of testing athletes in the lab, so just did not get a spare minute to be able to cut up the highlights package after I got in my training and all of that as well. So might go through that if I have a bit more time this week, maybe over the weekend, and cut up the highlights package from last week from some of the best questions, because we did have some really interesting discussion, some kind of, I guess, different questions to the topics we've been covering previously, and some really interesting ideas being thrown around, some good back and forth we had in the chat as well. So might get that one up later in the week, maybe over the weekend, and go through some of the best questions from that one. In terms of some of the other great content we've got up, really these 4 videos surrounding our last week's live stream are some of the content that we've had recently. One of mine in particular that I think is a really interesting discussion to have is talking about, does breathing more actually do anything in terms of getting more oxygen into the system? Like, is that going to be an effective method for you to lift your oxygen consumption? Go check out that video. Long story short, if you haven't watched it, doesn't really. It's more about, yes, we can get the air in to our system. That gives us best chance to get the oxygen in, but we still have to be good at extracting it and diffusing it into the bloodstream, so through gaseous exchange or diffusion into the blood. But then also we have to be really, really good at using it in the working muscle, because otherwise it's just going to pass through the system, get diffused back into the lungs, and just not be used or wasted, sent elsewhere in the system, and just kind of be, like I said, wasted fundamentally. So we're not using it. So breathing more may not actually be increasing your oxygen consumption. So something to keep in mind. And when we talk about training adaptations and improving, it really does come down to take in, transport, and utilize. We need all of these 3 steps: respiratory, cardiovascular, and muscular systems working together as a whole rather than their individual parts to be able to get that overall outcome to improve. In terms of some of the other stuff, really good questions coming through, particularly on Instagram. As I said before, get those questions in over on Instagram, and I'll chuck it up again because I know a few of you who've jumped in to the live stream here. If you aren't across everything on Instagram, oops. I hope I'm not muted. I hope I haven't been muted. I just got a warning on my screen saying I was being muted. Let me know in the chat if I am. I don't think I am. It's coming up my screen as I'm not. Fingers crossed. NJ Sports Science, go check out the Instagram tag over here. Go get involved, ask questions. One of the questions in particular was talking about devices and errors, and how do I know that my device is reading accurately, or how do I track these trends when I've been talking about don't look at VO2 max on your watch every day, look at it more of as a general trend over time. That's a better way to interpret that data. Good to hear. Thanks, Alan. Yeah, good to hear good to hear you can hear me, if that makes sense. Must have just been a little bit of an error on my end there in terms of I thought my microphone was on mute. But in terms of coming back to those devices, like how do you break through the error? Because at least every device is going to have some sort of error. We know that GPS watches, Apple Watch, Whoop. I know we've had a lot of questions about the Whoop bands recently in terms of heart rate variability, tracking sleep. We had some good discussion about that last week. How do we overcome that error to make meaningful insights in terms of what the data is doing? So great video. I'd go check that one out because it's really relevant to all of us using consumer-based devices. There's always going to be some sort of error in that device. So we need to make sure we're looking at big change. We're not looking at these small, maybe 0.1 of a mil per kilo per minute in terms of relative VO2 max or anything like that, or 1 beat per minute per day, like across a different day in terms of resting heart rate. We need to be looking at significant changes and larger magnitudes, larger size of the change, purely because we need to overcome the error to know that some sort of effect or change has actually happened. Did a great video yesterday. If you haven't gone and checked it out, for our cyclists and our triathletes, had some great questions about indoor trainers versus outdoor and the rollers. Caleb, one of our regulars in the chat, who might be watching now, if you are, say hello. If you jump in a little bit later on, I'm sure we'll see you because you always got some great questions. But was asking over on Instagram again, when should I be using these different types of sessions in terms of using these tools? And so that video really covers the ins and outs. And probably my favorite one over the last week is this one here, breaking up with your coach and why it's really beneficial. I've recently had an athlete rejoin me. I don't coach massive amounts of athletes. I'm actually only coaching 2 currently. One's on a bit of a pause through a bit of injury and sorting some other things out. But in terms of the other 2 athletes I coach, I've just taken one back on after having a break since 2018. So basically 2 years since we've worked together. We just rejoined, got some testing in last week, and then we're getting straight into the training as of this week. So why it was actually beneficial for us to go our separate ways and come back together now, that's all covered in that video there. I think it's a really useful takeaway for a lot of athletes out there. Everyone listening, if you are being coached or you're a coach yourself, make sure you sort of go have a watch of that one and just consider that you don't necessarily have to end the relationship between you and your coach, or with the athlete if you're coaching. But it's the type of thing that it can actually be really beneficial to take a bit of time apart, go learn and develop, go improve how you go about things, come with a fresh mindset, and then attack your next block of training or your next preparation for a race, whatever it might be, particularly now. Attack it with a new perspective, but then also a much more cohesive perspective. The main circumstance around sort of our change was that both myself and the athlete I'm talking about, we both just got a little bit burnt out. The athlete from training and lifestyle and finding work-life balance was a bit of a struggle. So he just got burnt out there. I got burnt out because I was working incredibly long hours, still training for football and umpiring, doing a whole bunch of things at work as well, having multiple responsibilities. I'm fortunate now we've expanded a little bit in terms of bringing on an extra part of the team to work with us. So some of the responsibilities that I did have can now be passed on to someone else, which is great. It does free me up to have more time for the athletes and working in the area and the space that I want to be doing, which is testing and coaching. So that, apart from anything, going away and studying and learning, and over 2 years, obviously I'm going to have my own development in terms of methodology and things like that as well. So go and check that one out. Go and check all the videos out first and foremost. But yeah, definitely that one I think is a really interesting discussion to have. It's a hard discussion to have. It's a difficult conversation to get involved in terms of should we put a pause on me coaching an athlete or the athlete being coached by me. however that works out in your scenario as well. But it can definitely be incredibly beneficial in the long run. All right, we've got a few in. Feel free to chuck in your questions. Sam, I did see, and I might come to this one first because if you didn't see in a recent video, Sam left a great question in the comment section. And he's just put in here, thanks for answering my question on cycling crossing over to running. If you don't mind me bringing it up, I think it's a good one that we can start with tonight as we get a few more joining us and getting some questions in. So leave them in the chat, and as always, I'll get to them when I can. In terms of that question around cycling crossover to running, Sam's question largely surrounded about, is there benefit for a runner to go and do a couple of cycling sessions in the week? And there definitely is. And where I typically use it mostly is for athletes who struggle with the large amount of running volume, the impact through the legs, might get injured a little bit more than the typical person when the volume goes up. That can be just a natural thing. Some people handle load a little bit better than others. Ideally, we progress the load at a gradual rate so we don't have to get injured and don't have to be susceptible to injury when training load goes up. But it's the type of thing, if you are, particularly older athletes find it as well, maybe you're working a really busy schedule and you can't get so many runs in the week and you want to just try and get an easy fix, jump on the trainer and do some bike. Lockdown was a perfect example. Getting bike in can be really useful, particularly doing the longer, slower stuff. So your zone 2, base case type work. We want to make sure we've got equivalent intensity, and that was a key part of our discussion in the comment section. Where Sam was just talking about that long, slow intensity on the bike is probably going to be about 5 to 7 beats per minute lower. But what we're looking at here is we're trying to build and continue to maintain some of our aerobic endurance, our aerobic capacity, fundamentally our physiological component, how well we're taking and transporting and utilizing oxygen at a base level, and just building some very general fitness, really, and maintaining that general fitness. At the end of the day, if you want to be a good runner, you need to run. So the specific muscular endurance component of being out there and running, tolerating the impact through the body and the legs, through the Achilles and the calf, having a strong complex through there, all of that type of stuff is only really going to be coming from running, and you can't necessarily cheat your way through it by doing lots of cycling. So adding in 1, maybe 2 cycling sessions a week as a substitute for, let's say your running program is, I'm running 4 times a week, 2 high intensity sessions, 2 long and slow. Maybe you throw in a ride in there, 45 minutes to an hour, nice and easy intensity. Or maybe you like going out for a ride with some mates on a weekend, nice and easy intensity, ride down to a coffee shop and back. That type of thing is good for just ticking off the muscular endurance side of things. We're not looking for a specific running benefit per se. We're not necessarily going to get any faster from running, but it is going to help us in terms of our general fitness and just topping up more than anything. Rather than going out and doing an extra 45 minutes of running, if your body quite can't handle that, or you don't necessarily want to run that extra time a week, doing 1 bike session is not going to, cross training is a really effective way of still getting some good general adaptation and general fitness. But keep in mind, it's not going to be as good as, like, if you want to have the same effect as what 6 runs a week would do, you really need to be running 6 times a week. That's just specificity. It's the same if we flipped it the other way. If you're a cyclist, you want to do a couple of runs a week, running isn't necessarily going to get you specifically fit for cycling, but it will get you generally fit. So that's the trade-off we're looking at. So it was a really good discussion in the comments there. And again, keep leaving those questions in the comments on the back of videos. If you think of an idea, I know in some of the videos we've had some comments and some questions that a little bit related to video, but they kind of seem like they're ideas that have stemmed from, someone's been watching the video and then gone, I've heard this and now it kind of triggers me to think of this other question that I had sitting somewhere in my brain as well. Perfectly fine. Get your questions in there. It doesn't necessarily have to match exactly what the video was talking about. If it does, great, because other people watching the video are gonna probably have sort of similar questions too. But if it's a question that sparks as a result of the conversation I'm having in the video or the topic I'm discussing, and it's a little bit related, but kind of going in a different direction, that's perfectly fine. Everyone works in different ways in terms of how they connect the dots. So definitely keep those coming. So I really love going through the comment section every couple of days and having a look and responding to those. As I said before, if you've got specific questions, a little bit more individualized about how it suits your specific situation, something like Instagram's a good place to go do that. Head over to @NJ I'll bring it up again because we keep growing. I'm seeing sort of 7 people in now. Head over to NJ Sports Science on Instagram and go send me a direct message if you've got a more specific question. And if you want to take it to the next level, we can always talk about setting up a time to maybe jump on a Zoom call or do a more, I guess, sort of deliberately set up consultation if we need to. Always happy to help people in our community that we're growing here up on YouTube. because we've got some really, really switched on people who are wanting to get the most out of the performance and training. If I can help in any way, that's awesome. Keep those questions coming through in the comments. What I'm going to go through very, very quickly now, for some who might have not seen it or they've been watching the videos and they're joining us recently, they're jumping in for the first time tonight. If you haven't heard me talk about it, we have a new button on the channel. You won't be able to see this from your end because I'm obviously logged into my account, but I have customized channel and managed videos. Just ignore those. But this new join button is a new feature on the channel. If you do want to keep supporting the channel above and beyond, subscribing, commenting, getting lots of value out of these live streams, you can click this little join button. It's actually down below the video as well. If you scroll down, you should be able to see it. And what it allows you to do is join up to Team NJ Sports Science for less than a coffee a month. I'll highlight that one there. Less than a coffee a month. You can just help support the channel in a little bit more, in a bigger way than just commenting, subscribing, sharing, getting involved on Instagram. Apart from anything, you actually notice in the chat, Alan's got a little icon next to his name, and that's our little loyalty badge here. That's one of the first sets of perks for our members when you join up. Makes it really easy for me to identify you in the comment sections, as we had with Sam before asking his question about cycling crossover to running. When I look through, I actually get a separate notification for all the members. So if you want your questions answered quickly and first, I typically will check that one. It's also really easy for me to see you in the chat when we do these live streams. I can see it straight away. It actually stands out, highlights your name, the works. You'll stand out to others in the community as well. And it's a little thank you in terms of supporting the channel above and beyond. There are going to be some more perks coming. We're currently, I think, about 4 or 5 members on the channel. When we get to 10, I'm going to be dropping the next perk. So little bit to sort of come in that. And once we hit a few benchmarks, maybe 10, I haven't worked out the other ones past that, but definitely at 10, I'm going to be adding a new perk. If you scroll down here, we've got members only live chat that I can turn on if I need to. But then also we're going to be adding to this. Price is going to stay the same. We're just going to constantly add some new little perks in there. Some exciting things to come along the way. So if you are interested, hit that join button. Go watch the little video here about what it's all about as well, what's involved and what might be coming. But yeah, really appreciate the support on the channel regardless. So even if you're just subscribing and commenting, that's awesome. Keep sharing the videos. Let's continue to build as many people that we can involved on this channel and subscribing. If you personally want to reach out and support the channel a little bit more, and like Sam said here, I really appreciate this in terms of the kind words here. You deserve more support for the work you do on this channel. I appreciate it. I just try and do my best, try and do what I can to help you guys answer the questions that do come through, provide my sort of knowledge and expertise, and have these really good discussions that we have as well. So if you want to get involved, hit that join button down below. Always incredibly grateful for it. And also, apart from anything, it makes it easier for me to create these videos, create this content, spend some time doing it. It allows me to take a little bit more time away from my job to be able to do it, because it keeps it pays for that extra couple of hours in the day that I'm taking out more than anything. So appreciate it as always. Got a great question from Alan coming through with the goods again. One of our regulars, and as I said before, one of our members. You'll see that badge next to his name in the chat over to this side. You'll see it over here on your screens. Love to throw you a question, but I'm 3 days out from a marathon, so no helping me now. What is the question? What is the question? Tell me. Send it in anyway, because you never know. There could be something that we can do. If it's something that, like, maybe we're talking about something in your training that you could have done better, things like that. At least it'll be something that we can discuss. If someone else is going into a marathon, we can talk about it. I'd really love to hear it. I think, unfortunately, if it may not help you because you're 3 days out, so be it. But if we can help someone else by having that question come through, I definitely think it's going to be really worth it. So I want to see that question come through, mate. I reckon it'd be a good discussion point anyway. And you never know. You might ask the question and go, actually, depending on what my response is, you might end up having maybe done something right when you thought you did a little bit off, whatever it might be. Send it through. Let's have a conversation about it. Anyone else who's watching now, get your questions in. Chuck them in the chat over here. We'll keep them flowing through. Did take last week a little bit just for a few people to get on. I know 7 p.m. might for some people, particularly in Melbourne, everyone's starting to get back in a bit of routine and get outside and things like that now. So might have a few sort of latecomers come into live stream. So get your questions coming through. It's always a good to have questions coming through on the lives. It's good for our replay and the people who are watching the replay as well, to have a few questions to sort of see where the discussion was going. Did take a little bit last week, but then once we got going, it was a long one again. We sort of went well and truly over that hour mark for a couple of weeks in a row, which is awesome to see. I mean, we've sort of done that a few times now because we're getting some great discussions here on the channel. So Alan, specifically, if you want to get that question in, I'd really be keen on seeing where you were sort of thinking with it anyway, and in terms of what you're sort of going for. Sam, if you're still watching, you've got another one, another question, or maybe a different question related to your running and your program, things like that. Get them in. Love to hear them. What have we got? 8 a.m. 8 a.m. Whereabouts are you in the world? Let me know where you are as well, because I know we have people all over the place. I did a Zoom call with someone who's been watching some of the videos on the channel who was in Hawaii, had a chat to him. That's kind of fortunate because I think they were only sort of 2 hours ahead, but day behind, if that makes sense. So they're 22 hours behind or something like that. It blew my mind in terms of where we're at, but it's the type of thing that, we've got people all over the world. So in the UK, Sam is from. So welcome to anyone else who's watching from the UK or watching the replay later on. Obviously, it's 8 a.m. in the morning for you. There's going to be a few early risers for everyone else who might be watching similar sort of time zone. Also, come back across here. What do we got? Talking about Alan's question before. Okay, so it's more around just looking at trying to make sure you're confident going in. So you're just working through it. That's perfectly fine. I mean, in terms of performance, everyone's got their different standards of performance, really, don't they? So I mean, if your goal is just to complete it and get through it and feel strong, that's just as cool in terms of performance, and it'll probably lead to a PB compared to your first one. And then we can worry about maybe picking up time at a later date. Experience is key. I mean, if I think back to last year doing my first 70.3, I went in thinking I'd probably be able to do a reasonable time. Had a pretty average swim for what I probably could do. Was a couple of minutes slower than what I thought. Got on the bike, had a really, really good bike, and then just bombed 10k into the run. Had a shocking sort of 10 to 15 k's, and then the last sort of 5 or 6 weren't too bad, and the last 3 in particular were really, really good. So it's the type of thing that the confidence side of thing is huge in terms of that experience. And the more you race and the more you get involved in events, the better and better and better you get. Mainly just from knowing what to expect. I think that's the big one that I'll learn from next time, is being able to do basically the same thing. I can probably afford to go out a little bit harder in the swim and maintain a little bit harder in the swim. Probably need to do a little bit more prep on the run in terms of my longer, slower running. My intensity was really good, but my just Ks in the legs just really got me at the end because I didn't do enough. All of these things you're only really going to learn once you've done the event. So all the best for a couple of days' time. If I don't see you in the comment section or a question popping up, or you don't get in contact before then, all the best, Alan, for your marathon a couple of days' time. Be keen to sort of hear how you go and just your thoughts, regardless of how it turns out. If it's good, great. If it doesn't turn out, it's great. Let's discuss why and how can we improve it for next time. That's always part of the process and the learning part. And hopefully this little community we got here is really supportive of that as well. And anyone else who's watching and racing, if you want to talk about share your successes, but then also share things that didn't go so well. I'm sure that everyone here is sort of willing to support you regardless, and get involved in a discussion of, all right, how can we make things better? Even if it was a great performance, how can we now take that to the next level? But if things didn't go so great, so be it. We sort of 2020 as a whole hasn't gone great for most people, but take it on the chin, learn from it, be able to move forward is the best way to go about it. See if we've got any other questions coming through. Be keen to go through a couple if we've got them. Let's have a look. Coming off the back of Alan just aiming for a 5:15 per K. That's still going to produce a reasonable time. I've guys come in, and I'll pop it up in here. 5:15 per K for a marathon, still going to put out a pretty solid time in terms of performance. I mean, I have athletes come in and test with me that'll range right from 6:47 minute per K, probably some of when I say the lower end. Before that, some of them just aren't, I guess, far enough into running that they might know about lab testing and the benefits of it for their level of performance. But I've had guys go out and do 7-minute Ks in marathons. I've had guys go as fast as sort of sub 4-minute Ks and do like 2:42s and 2:45s. Those are the extreme ends of the spectrum, but everyone in between. But I mean, a lot of people would be loving going out and doing a 5:15. I mean, you could sustain that. That'd be a really solid time. So all the best in that in a couple of days' time. Sam's got a great question here, talking about bicarbonate gel. This is an interesting one. I've had probably not so much recently, but more so last year, and I get to where I sort of heard of it. Have you seen the Ampoule sodium bicarbonate gel? Do you think it has any utility, as in as in theory, the 800 meter run, I think is what you're referring to there in terms of the track event. Produces the most amount of lactic, and so buffering it might have some marginal benefits. If people aren't sure what we're talking about here in terms of the bicarbonate gel, basically the concept behind it is it's like it's just like not a cream, but like it comes in a little tube. You rub it on like maybe your quads and things like that, and the point is it's going to be absorbed through the skin and allow you to, at the end of the day, bicarbonate is what is being dumped into our system naturally to be able to buffer things like lactic acid. So when the intensity goes up, you're working really hard, you're feeling that burn in the legs, the natural process is to dump bicarbonate. The body creates it and produces it to be able to then buffer. It's basically a base. So we have acids and bases. Without going into the chemistry too much, they balance each other out. If it becomes really acidic, you need something that's more basic. Like for example, in terms of things around the home, bleach, for example, that you use in your washing is a base. So it's at the opposite end of the spectrum to something like if you have a lemon, it's got that citric acid in it. That's more of that acid. So those two would sort of counter each other out. It's kind of what we're talking about with lactic acid, and then also something like bicarbonate. The gel, like I said, the principle is you rub it on, it absorbs through the skin, allows you to have a bit more bicarbonate to then buffer. I think there's probably some efficacy, if you like, or usefulness. It's probably a probably more relevant term here, to maybe using it. Is it placebo though? Maybe. I think that's probably one from a placebo side of things. I think is a hard one to test. Like, is it the sensation of you rubbing something on and thinking it's going to be better that you just push through and you're able to tolerate lactic acid better from a short-term perspective at things like an 800? Maybe. Is that going to lead to a performance gain? Yes. Well, then it probably has some merit to it. I mean, placebo is an incredible thing. Where I first heard of this was actually on the Lance Armstrong podcast, talking about the Tour de France last year in 2019. And he was talking about things like bicarbonate gel, and he's a big advocate for it. Take that how you will in terms of if he's an advocate for it, is it actually useful, or is it maybe these days it's a bit more just of a marketing spin and he's earning some money off the back of it? I think he's got a bit of a financial interest in companies that make that type of product, or that Ampfuel one specifically. I think he's somewhat involved. So it's the type of thing that obviously he's going to promote it and say it's good. But I also kind of look at it and go, if someone like Armstrong, as much as he did a lot of things wrong, he's also very much at the forefront of knowing what works. And I guess innovation, because you could argue to some extent, I don't want to go into the ins and outs of it too much, but you could argue to some extent that what they were doing for a period there, as much as we know it as doping and it was cheating and it's not ethical and things like that, it's one form of innovation. I'm not saying it's right. I definitely don't condone doping and things like that, but he's obviously on that front edge of going the extra mile and finding these little things to give him an edge, an advantage, and that's just sort of ingrained in him. So something like this might have some marginal benefit. As Sam said there, is it going to be useful for the shorter events? I would think it's more useful for our anaerobically based events, because at some point it's probably going to wear off. And there's only going to be so much bicarbonate that's going to actually absorb into your skin. So maybe the short-term stuff, but I think placebo is probably where more it's at. Similar to like taking anything. I mean, caffeine or a placebo caffeine tablet could be just as effective. There's a number of placebos that you could use that, as long as you believe in it strong enough, and the science is there in terms of, if you want to look into the voodoo science, like science of voodoo and things like that, but then also what we call belief effect, which is essentially placebo. If you strongly think something is happening and it's working, then it probably is. It is basically the physiological response that we get as a result. So chuck it on, see how you go. It'd be worth testing. Like if anyone has some, I'd be interested to test it and see if it actually does anything. I'm probably not going to see an effect though, because I'm a little bit skeptical. So if I had someone tell me 100% works, and I just fully believed it, then I'd probably get a different result again, because just somewhere psychologically I push myself a little bit harder. So interesting one. It's one to watch, I would think. But great question there, Sam. I think it's, and you've said here, take it with a pinch of salt, seeing as though Armstrong endorses it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything that comes out of his mouth, you have to kind of question a little bit now these days, to an extent. But like I said, for a long period of time there, they were doing some legal innovations, things like sock height and aerodynamics and things like that. They were doing legally, and they were on the forefront of that. It's just all the other stuff that wasn't so great. So something like this might be interesting. He was also all across the ketone ester. If anyone remembers last year's Tour de France where Alaphilippe randomly dropped back to his team car instead of taking a neutral service bottle to get the special supplement that they're using, and it's been a bit of research into. Armstrong was all across that before they were really starting to show it, and he knew all about that before the tour even started. And then as it obviously unfolded, he was one of the first ones to talk about it. So having that insight in terms of what is coming and what is next, and what might be giving athletes an advantage, I think he's potentially a decent place to look and just at least get his thoughts to then go and do your own research. Always do your own research, particularly anything that he says anyway. All right, moving through. Hopefully that answers that one anyway. Let me know if it didn't, or if you want me to go a little bit further on maybe what's going on there. But we'll move into our next one. Josh here, just managing osteitis pubis, which is an unfortunate thing to have. I haven't had it personally, but I know athletes who find it quite painful and can be quite a difficult thing to work through. So hopefully your recovery and rehabilitation through that's going quite well. Back into running at short distances, which is good. I've noticed my heart rate has increased a fair bit since stopping my training for 2 months. How long do you think, second part of the question here, it usually takes back to get back to that peak level? Depends how long you've been out for, is when I say the short answer, because we know after at least sort of like a 14-day period, you're going to lose a massive chunk of what you've gained. I mean, everything that you've gained in probably realistically a 4 to 6 week period can be lost within less than 10 days. If you just go and do nothing, which I assume probably if you had to really drop everything and bring everything right back, probably going to lose a lot. If you're able to maintain anything like, I don't know, and again, I'm not a physio or anything like that, but I don't know if you're able to do any cycling or some cross training or maybe rowing, like something different to running that you can keep a bit of that aerobic side of things in there. That is going to help, when I say minimize the damage, and then also help get you back a little bit quicker, because just running alone, if you can only run, then we're kind of limiting. Well, if you can only run short amounts at the moment because of the niggle or the injury, if you want to call it that, it's going to take a lot longer to get back because you're limited on, all right, how much can I progress my running. But if you're able to get on the bike and do some extra there, you can do some cross training, whatever it might be. All of that is going to help you get back. The time frame then depends on how well you adapt to the training. If you dropped right down to like the lowest you've ever been, you'll probably find within a 4 to 6 week block, you'll be back up at a reasonable level of fitness. You might not be peaked, but you'll be at a reasonable level of fitness. After that, it then just depends on, well, what are you trying to train for specifically? If you're training for a marathon, for example, well, then it would probably take a normal marathon cycle to get you reasonably close. And as I said, it depends how long you've had out. If you've had the better part of 3 months, out of training as a result of injury, that's going to take quite a long time to come back from. It might take you ultimately 3 to 4 months to start seeing you getting a little bit close to where you were. And that's 3 to 4 months of full-on training, not just easing back into it as you're going to have to here. So the process can be quite lengthy. You've got to be patient with it. And I think I've just seen an add-on to what we're talking about here. You've been swimming a bit, which is good, but it doesn't seem to translate to running. And majorly, the thing there is going to be it's no impact, and also it's very difficult to get the intensity up in the pool. Something I talk about a lot with athletes when we talk about VO2 training and intervals in the pool. It's very hard to elicit an actual VO2 intensity when you're swimming unless you've got a good enough technique to swim fast enough. Most of the time, you're just working hard, but you're not actually going at a fast enough intensity to elicit that top end VO2 because of the change of the resistances. So that's where you probably maybe undercooking it, or when I say undercooking it, underdoing it a little bit compared to what you might be able to do if you're able to ride, or if you're able to do something else where you can get that heart rate up a little bit quicker and for a more sustained period of time. Lower body versus upper body in terms of conditioning as well, those types of things. Those types of things are really good indicators too. I mean, swimming can be predominantly upper body. The muscular endurance isn't going to transfer over. So yeah, we're going to have more difficulty. Whereas when we're talking earlier, you might have missed it, but we're talking earlier about the crossover between runners doing cycling sessions. And I think that cycling would be a little bit more effective for you because at least it's lower body. And that's going to be a lot closer than doing a swimming. So I understand a bit of your frustration there. It is going to take a bit of a process. It's hard to pinpoint it exactly how many weeks and say it's going to take X number of weeks to get there. I'd probably say if you're able to get back into 100% of your training load once you get to that point, give it at least a 4 to 6, maybe 4 to 8 week period before you start seeing yourself getting back to that reasonable level of fitness. After that, then it's a case of you just got to do the work to get back to that peak, which could take you, in total time, could take you a couple of months. It might be quicker, it might be slower. It really depends on how your body adapts and responds and regains that fitness back to where it was. At least you can get to that top level. So there's a bit of motivation for you in terms of a benchmarker where you want to get to and maybe exceed as well to help kick things along in training. I know that was probably a little bit vague. I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight there in terms of talking enough through how I'd think through it. As I said, it's quite difficult to put specific time frames on things like that. I've given you some guides there from what I've seen. Again, not being a physio, it's hard for me to understand in terms of exactly where you're at in terms of your niggles in your injury there, and how far into rehab and things like that. We'd have to have a bit more of a comprehensive discussion, but that would give you a rough sort of timeline of where I would think about, if everything went well, that's kind of the timeline I'd be working off to seeing you back to reasonable level of fitness and then ultimately peaking fitness. Moving into our next question, a couple of good ones coming through, and as similar to last week, we had just a little bit of a delay for people to start getting those questions coming in. A few people coming in a little bit later to the stream as well, likely, so that's fine. Do you have any good prediction workouts for different distances, like 5K, 10K, half marathon, etc.? In terms of prediction workouts, not specifically. I mean, I don't tend to go, like, I have benchmarking sessions of what I want athletes to hit. I think that, like, the traditional monofartlek is a go-to for me to have a look at where is an athlete actually at, and are they at a level where I think they're at. The 90 on, 90 float twice, and then you do your 60-second efforts, you do your 30-second efforts, and your 15s. I always find that's a really good one for this shorter distance, in particular 5K, 10K, because it's going to be at and above threshold, and as an average with the float recoveries in there, it's going to be quite equivalent to what you're going to be experiencing there and thereabouts in a 5K and 10K total. So I really like it for the shorter stuff, and for triathlon as well, sprint distance triathlon, Olympic distance triathlon. That's a good one to see where your running form's at. When it comes to some of the longer ones, I really look at half marathon and marathon. My indicator is what is the top end of your longer, slower running. So, I mean, Alan mentioned before that he was talking about his marathon aiming for 5:15 pace, which is part of his zone 2 pace. I really look at that, particularly marathon and half marathon. I look at where is the top end of someone's zone 2. So that's their long, slow, comfortable running, the highest intensity that they can basically sit on all day and be reasonably comfortable. That then gives me an idea of, okay, I know you're going to be sitting probably a little bit above that if you're in for a marathon, or you're going to be sitting pretty close to on that. A little bit above that top end of zone 2 if you're in a half marathon, and for a marathon you're probably going to be sitting on maybe just below, depending on what pace and where you're at in terms of your athletic ability. So I more look at those types of runs. They're kind of my predictors. I had a really interesting chat. If anyone's seen the company Inside, INSYCD, I think that's how you spell it. I might have got that wrong there. They're an interesting company popping up. Had a great chat with them. They're based over in Europe. Do a lot of work in cycling in particular. Do a lot of work with, like, pro cycling teams. Bora Hansgrohe is one of them, and I mention them because one of the key high performance staff there is also Jan Frodeno's coach for all our triathletes who don't really follow the cycling. So they've got this system where you can do some testing. They've built, I guess, an analysis suite, if you like. We can go through and actually start to predict where someone's test results. So by doing their testing protocol, they go through a series of efforts. And I'm not necessarily plugging this. This is just the information I found out from the chat the other week. And I'm kind of interested to continue looking into it. They're able to reasonably accurately predict where an athlete needs to be in terms of performance of those tests, to then be able to do a certain marathon time or a certain half marathon time or a time trial or a triathlon, which I think is really interesting. And they've been using that in professional cycling to some good effect. They've been using it obviously in triathlon, some of the pro triathletes floating around as well. I think that's a really interesting process to look into as well. So something like that would be more ideal for me, because I like that process of having a test, and I do all my work in testing rather than necessarily training sessions, because things can go wrong in training sessions all the time. Things go wrong in testing, sure, but I like that process of being able to test and then go, all right, that you can run like basically a virtual test is what they call it, where you go, if if I want to hit a 90-minute half marathon, what numbers do I need to see in these test results to make sure that to be pretty confident that athlete is going to be able to meet the benchmark or be able to make that 90-minute half marathon. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, an interesting piece of software or piece of data analytics, whatever you want to look at it, however you want to call it. I think it's a really interesting way to go about predicting performance as well. Prediction is always a bit of a tricky game too, and this is probably the last thing I'll cover on this question is, at the end of the day, it's an educated guess. You're never really going to be able to pinpoint it, and even then, they were sort of admitting, the guys at Inside were admitting that their prediction in most cases has sometimes been like 30 seconds to a minute out, which I mean is pretty good if we're looking at a half marathon or a marathon. If you're only 30 seconds off what you predicted, and 30 seconds faster or 30 seconds slower, that's a pretty good prediction. But it's never going to be 100% accurate. So if there is a little bit of variance in there, and you had, for example, a couple of minutes difference in terms of prediction and where you're actually at, obviously there's some interesting things there. So having a look, sort of follow up on that one, in regards to my comment about sort of zone 2 pace for prediction for our longer distance events. Interesting with zone 2 pace for prediction, although my heart rate was 181 average in terms of zone 4 for my marathon, so that wouldn't be too accurate for me. It's a type of thing when I talk about zone 2 as well, just keep in mind I talk about a 5-zone system. So I'm really talking about anything up to about 70 to 75% of your VO2 max. Really, it's your long, slow, build the Ks type run, and the maximum before it's that last intensity before you hit tempo, but before you increase to become a tempo run. That's really what I'm talking about, is that benchmark. So hopefully that I guess make it a little bit more clear if I maybe missed the mark there in terms of explaining it. But really depends on where you're at. Like I said, it's not necessarily that pace is going to be your half marathon, your marathon pace. I just see that as then a benchmark of, well, where do I think the athlete can sit in relation to that? What is realistic? If an athlete in a half marathon, their top end of their zone 2, the long slow is 4-minute K pace, I think, well, half marathon, they're probably likely going to be able to sit a little bit less than 4-minute K pace in more of a tempo, maybe 355, maybe 350, and still be able to manage that pretty comfortably. Then you'll put out a good time. That's more how I use it, rather than saying that is our pace. For a marathon, for a lot of athletes, they will tend to sit closer to that zone 2, so it can be a bit better of a predictor. But the shorter you make the event, because the faster you run, if you're a really quick marathon runner, if you're running 4-minute K pace and the top end of your zone 2 is only 417, well, it's easier to tolerate a tempo run for a shorter period of time, isn't it? That just makes sense. So the better and quicker you are and fitter you are as an athlete, the higher up we can start to lift that. So it really becomes a bit individual. But like I said, I use that as, I guess, a benchmarking to then understand where I think that athlete can then sit in relation to that number. Not necessarily that is our pace. It's here's where they are in that type of session. I know it's going to be pretty close to there, maybe just above, maybe just below, based on everything else I know about that athlete. That's going to then inform my decision on where I think they should be pacing themselves when they go out. And we have that discussion all the time and see what is realistic is probably the big thing. Before I get into the next question from Sam, I have to point this out. Sam's just become a member here on the channel. We've hit 5. That is awesome. Like I said, we're trying to hit 10 members. Thank you so much for joining Team Endo Sports Science. If you are interested in joining, hit the join button down below. Really appreciate you jumping on board. Give him a big shout out in the chat as well. You can actually see it pops up, gives it a big highlight over on the, I've got to make sure I point to the right way there. This way, over here somewhere, you'll be able to see on the right-hand side, or maybe if you're watching on your phone, it comes up down the bottom. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. And to everyone who has jumped on and joined Team Endo Sports Science, I really do appreciate it. If anything, it keeps helping this channel run. The more members we get, the less ads will probably start to pop up on the videos, because I'll have more ability to be able to turn those off. The bigger this channel grows, I get more and more features in terms of YouTube's capabilities too. So I can do things that make it better for you guys, rather than popping up a video and it brings a whole bunch of ads. I can go in and turn those settings off. All of those types of things we can do. The more members that join and things like that. But apart from anything, like I said, I really appreciate the support regardless. And if you want to go above and beyond, be like Sam, join the team. And to everyone else who's joined the team as well, Alan there, thanks for welcoming him to the team as well. Plenty of exciting perks coming your way if you're getting some great value out of this channel. Coming to Sam's question now, after all that excitement of him joining as a member as well. Have you tried altitude tents before? Interesting question, because we have talked about altitude on the channel before. If you haven't seen that video, Sam, I highly recommend it. A little while ago, we talked about altitude and the benefits of altitude in particular and what's actually happening in that space. They seem useful in practice as it makes sleeping high and training low both easy and convenient, which is the perfect method to go about. So maybe you have watched that video, you're on the right track there in terms of train low, live high, train low. It means the same thing. That's where we're going to get our most bang for buck. Long exposure at altitude, and then being able to keep our training intensity up there for our actual sessions by being at low altitude. Easy and convenient, but I've heard anecdotes of them being uncomfortable to sleep in. Of course, it's going to be uncomfortable. It depends on the size that you've got. So we sat down a long time ago on our Mets Performance podcast. If you're interested in listening to a podcast that I've been involved in for a while, and what we've been doing on Mets Performance where I work, it's called the Physiology Secrets podcast. It's available on Apple. We have a lot of the episodes up here on YouTube as well on the Mets Performance channel. Go and check those out. We sat down with a guy from this company called Box Altitude. They make altitude tents and altitude chambers. They have all sorts of different types of them, and there's all sorts of different things. I think the first thing when we're talking about comfort is some of the small ones that are like a single person. It's almost like a little, it's almost like a single person tent, if that makes sense. Like you could put it outside and sort of sleep in it. It's kind of like that. They might be more uncomfortable because if you're someone like me who likes to spread out a bit when I sleep or I move quite a bit, that type of thing is definitely gonna be uncomfortable. It might get quite warm as well. I actually had an athlete that I was coaching for a while and training for a while, doing some consulting for, marathon runner who went and basically purchased enough of a system to make his entire bedroom an altitude chamber. So you imagine the room like I'm in here, basically sealed the windows, sealed the door, and then had all of the stuff set up so he could pump in. Basically, the altitude chambers work. They pump in extra gases like nitrogen, hydrogen, a bunch of other stuff to drop the oxygen percentage. He'd set all of that up in his room in his house, so that every time he went in to go and sleep, he'd spend as much time in there as he could. He would eat dinner in there while he was using it. He'd do a whole bunch of stuff to get his maximum exposure per day. That made it a lot more comfortable because it was like walking into a room and just being in a room for a long period of time, rather than being enclosed in a smaller environment. And also because he didn't necessarily notice anything in the room, he couldn't physically see anything other than what he already had, like a bookshelf and his bed and things like that, and maybe a desk, a chair, all of the normal things you would have in your room. It then just put him at ease a little bit more to get the benefit. In terms of the benefit of it, we know altitude is a short-term benefit. So I mean, going that extra mile and converting your room or your house into an altitude chamber, I think is probably a little extreme. This was a case where he was very, very interested. Had obviously the money to do it as well. Gun athlete too. I mean, he ran like a 240 marathon. One of the quickest guys I've had go and train for a marathon from an amateur level anyway, and one of the quickest amateurs that I've worked with. Pretty sort of solid athlete, and like I said, wanted to go that extra mile and was doing every little bit he could. Used altitude. Definitely saw a little bit of benefit there, and he sort of reported some good benefit. But in terms of that convenient side of things, absolutely. But the comfort is king. So really, it is a bit of a trade-off. If you really want to do it and get the benefit, that short-term boost in terms of performance that we can get from using something like an altitude tent, try to make it as comfortable as you can, because that's going to be that's where you're going to get the most bang for buck, because ultimately we need minimum sort of 12 hours exposure a day, and that's why the full room setup is probably your ideal scenario. Or going and staying at altitude accommodation. A couple of universities, like I know Victoria University here in Melbourne, I don't know if they just like rent it out to amateurs, but mainly for professionals, they allow to go in and stay in their accommodation. There's altitude. Sam is saying here you're renting one for 2 months, so definitely seems ideal. In terms of it, I mean, the short term period is the key there. It's all about it's all about making sure we get enough stimulus. So if you're able to make it as comfortable as possible, ideal. But like I said, the altitude accommodations as well floating around. Not everywhere has them. They're hard to probably get into as well as an amateur, but they can definitely do some benefit. The smaller tent-like setups, if it's just you in it, make it comfortable. Obviously, you have to then consider things like anyone that you're living with who potentially is impacted by you using an altitude tent, or changing your whole room into an altitude chamber. Keep in mind that as well. But the more comfortable you can make it, the more time you're going to be spending in there, likely, because it is more comfortable, and therefore we're going to get a much better stimulus out of that altitude aspect from that side of things. Coming to probably, I guess, a side question in regards to altitude here. I'm not too sure who Killian is. That name doesn't ring a bell, but use a special mask while training to acclimate himself to high altitude. I wonder if it has a good effect on endurance. Hopefully you can be a little bit more specific about what that mask is. If you're referring to just those training masks, they're basically what a lot of people are just kind of wearing as a face mask at the moment around the world with COVID. If you're referring to one of those, no, doesn't do anything apart from, yes, we get a bit of a development in respiratory muscle function, sure. But for a reasonably trained healthy endurance athlete, that's going to do, when I say bugger all, essentially nothing for your endurance performance. If you're maybe referring to any type of mask setup, and if you say special mask, this is why I bring this up. If you're referring to a mask type setup that has some sort of connection to a mixing chamber and gases to be able to reduce the oxygen consumption or to reduce the percentage of oxygen, maybe, but I highly doubt it. So it's more likely just a restriction in air intake. So the best example I can give is it's like breathing through a straw. You're not changing the percentage of oxygen. That's the big one in terms of altitude. It's all about the differences in pressures in the air. When we go up to altitude, thinner air, less oxygen available. What does that create? That creates a bit more of a difficult gradient because gases move from high to low concentration. So out in the atmosphere here at sea level, I've got a lot of oxygen around me, not much in my lungs. So when I breathe in, plenty of oxygen is going to fill into my lungs because there's not much in here. So it moves from high concentration outside to low concentration inside. Where we get the good benefit to try and maximize how much we can absorb and take up, more red blood cells, etc., at altitude, is that it's low concentration in the atmosphere and low concentration in my lungs. So it's harder to then flow down that changing concentration or concentration gradient is what we call it, that slope. The steeper the slope, the better. So the lower you are, the more available oxygen, the steeper that slope. So oxygen just comes flooding in. And that's why we get a really good benefit when we come back. We have all the extra red blood cells, that extra ability to extract and diffuse oxygen into the bloodstream. We come back down, we've got heaps of available oxygen here, and it just floods in and the body loves it. But then it doesn't last for a long period of time. Whereas when we go up to altitude, it's really hard initially because, and even just day-to-day things just become a bit more fatiguing because our body's getting used to, it's hard to get oxygen in the first place because the natural process of how gases move isn't quite happening as effectively because there's just less out in the atmosphere. So maybe if you can jump in there and give us a bit more idea about that mask you're talking about. But like I said, unless it was hooked up to some sort of mixing chamber and gases and stuff like that, which for maybe a mountaineer could be practical, but for athletes probably not. It would likely be just one of those like training masks. And I mean, if you don't know what I'm referring to, maybe I'll quickly look up just to make sure we're all across it. Not Training Peaks, training mask. If you have a look at these are the type of things that just do not work. I mean, for the most part, these are just what people have been wearing for face coverings for COVID, essentially. So they just don't work. It's more about respiratory muscle function. They used to be called altitude masks. They actually legally had to change the name to training mask because there was a legal process in which they disproved the fact that it wasn't simulating altitude. I mean, it's pretty easy. Like putting a mask on your face is not going to change the concentration gradient of the atmosphere. I mean, it's a pretty large claim. While we're here, I might actually just look up what was his name, Killian. If you can get it, that'd be great. I've just seen your comment there in terms of getting it in and trying to find some information. Path to Everest. Okay, so it sounds like he's a mountaineer. Let's see what we're talking about here. Let me know if I'm on the right track, and if you are following along with this, hopefully I'm finding some stuff. I'm just going to go images and just see what happens. If you're referring to this, is this what we're talking about in terms of the mask situation? He's hooked up to Hopefully it's going to make it a little bit bigger for me. Not quite. Hooked up to a mask and the tube coming out. If that's what you're talking about, then yeah, that's the type of thing I was mentioning in terms of it's hooked up to some sort of mixing chamber, and they're pumping in extra gases other than oxygen to be able to do it. I assume I've got the right guy here in terms of Mountaineer. That's one way to be able to do it. And in terms of, I guess, portability of that setup, he would be able to take that to any sort of treadmill setup that he's got, compared to having to go to an altitude tent. So it's an interesting one. I mean, that's more, like you mentioned, it's more acclimation, getting used to the sensation rather than maybe the altitude benefit. Yeah, cool. So I'm on the right track here in terms of this picture. So anyone who's watching, we know what we're talking about now. There's this like mask setup. There's a pipe coming out or a tube coming out, it likely hooked up to a mixing chamber. It's pumping him out the gases. That is going to give him the sensation of what altitude is like to acclimate him. So acclimatization and acclimation are two different things. Acclimatization is going to the environment and actually physically being in and amongst it, having to adapt and physiologically change. Acclimation, slight change of the word there, is just getting used to it in a simulated way. So you could almost argue that an altitude tent is acclimation because it's not actual altitude, it's simulated. But the sustained exposure is where we get the benefit. So 12 hours a day, minimum 2,400 meters above sea level is where we're going to get the altitude benefit. Doing sessions like this will get him used to those conditions, but it's not necessarily going to give him an endurance effect like we see with going and doing altitude training or doing a live high, train low strategy in altitude tent. So that makes it a little bit more clear in terms of what he's using there. I can understand that principle. There's a few gyms that have popped up offering like sessions where you can go in and do like an hour session. They're useful again if you're going up to high altitude to do a training camp and you want to get that sensation, or you're going up to some mountains because that's where your event is. Going and doing some practice in those facilities just to get a feel for what it's like is a good starting point, but it's not going to deliver that altitude benefit in terms of the science of how we actually improve from an aerobic endurance perspective. And the physiological change is not going to happen in those short periods. You need the long-term exposure, and that's why that live high, train low is the best way to go. Or go up and do an actual altitude training camp is the I guess the other alternative, or the old school alternative. Altitude tents make it, as we said before, a lot more convenient. But interesting discussion nonetheless, because I have seen facilities like that pop up. It is the type of thing. It's not like a 1 hour exposure or a 2 hour exposure at a single time, and then that's it, and that's all you do. Is not going to do really anything. You need long-term, multiple, like 2 weeks at least of 2,400 meters, 12 hours a day, consistently every day to be able to get the altitude benefit. That's what all the research has told us and is telling us, not 1 hour bursts a day. Again, difference between acclimatization and acclimation. It's the same for heat. Heat training, doing simulated sessions in a heat chamber, or pumping up the heaters in your room, turning on the shower to simulate some humidity. If you're training in your bathroom, for example, is a good way to do it. That is acclimation. Acclimatization would be like going over to Kona a month before or 2 months before and training in that environment to get used to the temperature and the climate. Two different things. Altitude and heat, we go on the same things there. Hopefully that sort of covers that one. Great question though, and good discussion about altitude. I always love talking about altitude because it's a really interesting topic that we hear a lot, but making sure we get it right is really, really key. Tim's got a question coming through now. Unfortunate to hear he's broken his foot, so he's training on the bike until he can run again. If I'm just trying to do base training using the bike instead of running, what sort of session would you recommend? You might have missed our little discussion at the beginning with Sam's question that came through in the comments talking about the substitutive bike in there. So doing some long, slow, think about your long and slow base case that we do running. Take off about 5 beats in terms of heart rate, so lower heart rate on the bike. Doing some of those sessions, if you can, if it's not painful for your foot, is obviously going to be useful. And you said you're training on the bike, so I'm going to assume that that's fine. Doing some long, slow Ks on the bike is going to keep some just general fitness and aerobic capacity into your system. Take off about, like I said, for the same equivalent session of going out and doing long, slow base Ks running, take off about 5, maybe 7 beats per minute. So lower heart rate, sit on that, go for at least 20 minutes, but You might build up to 45 hour. Really, however much cycling you feel like doing, you don't necessarily have to do a lot, because if your focus is running, don't go bananas on it. But in terms of the cycling side of things, build up as much as early as you like. But that's going to produce a lot of improvement already in maintenance of fitness. The other side of things as well is I would definitely recommend adding in some sort of high intensity stimulus in there. Again, if you can tolerate it and it's not going to hurt your foot by doing it on the bike, do some short efforts to try and keep the top end of your aerobic system and top end of your aerobic engine working up near VO2 max. It might just be short. It might be 30. You might do 4 by 90 seconds on, 90 seconds off, just as hard as you can go, and then take a passive recovery or very, very easy spinning recovery. You might do 5 by 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off. It's not a specifically ideal stimulus in terms of the amounts of working time, things like that. Something is better than nothing to prevent the top end of your engine dropping too much. We just want to target all aspects of our physiology. So let's say if you can ride 3 times a week, maybe doing 1 to 2 high intensity and then the other one long slow, and maybe alternate each week. 1 week you do 2 high intensity and 1 long slow. The next week you do 2 long slow, 1 high intensity. It can be a good starting point if you don't want to do massive amounts of bike. There's sort of some guidelines there. So let me know in the chat there if that answers your question. Really simple. Some sort of intensity, some sort of long slow is just going to maintain your engine, and then when you can get back running, that's where we can build the specificity back in and start to work on the running side of things a little bit more closely. And even for a while, you might just keep the bike in there just while you're getting some of the running volume back and just spending some time on legs, build some of that resilience to fatigue that you're inevitably going to have from being able to go back in and run again. But then slowly bring the bike out, maybe, and if you want to keep it in like 1 session a week, great. Slowly sort of bring it back more to, all right, we're getting most of our bulk of our stuff done running once your foot has fully repaired. But don't necessarily rush that process. I absolutely stress that. Make sure your foot is completely okay before you really start pushing the running volume, and just be cautious with it as well in terms of that build back. Is always the best way to go. All right, Sam's got another question here. Do you have any pre-race supplement routine, as there are quite a few out there, for example, caffeine? I have not heard of citrulline malate. I have not heard of that. Glycerol, beta-alanine, whole bunch of supplements here. I have talked about this a bit before. Personally, I think we can do pretty well in terms of what our diet is doing to not necessarily need some of these supplements. Pre-event or pre-race, something like caffeine, depending on your event, can be useful. Like really short event, can be good to just get the heart rate up nice and quick, get us excited, get us get us sort of active and awake. So a bit of caffeine in a short burst event prior is probably useful. More save it though for later in an event when we need to get that mental alertness back, when we need to sort of just get back on track and refocus. Wake us up a bit, if you like, at the back end of the event is more where I use caffeine. Outside of that, really, I keep it super simple. Is stay hydrated, don't drink too. Stay hydrated, and don't drink too much. So you've got it sitting in your guts and you feel a bit sick when you get into the race, or you have to go to the toilet a lot. And then making sure you're taking in a really good quality meal about 2.5 hours before, and then have some top up snacks all the way up till about 15 minutes to half an hour before the race. Maybe have something like a banana just to top yourself up. That's really as simple as my strategy is, and what I recommend for athletes. I mean, supplements are 1%ers. Like, how much of a difference is it going to make to you? Maybe not. Like we sort of talked about with the bicarbonate gel as well. I mean, the things I would stay away from is having things like a carbohydrate gel immediately before a race, because that's going to spike your uptake of carbohydrate and you start burning your carbs a lot quicker than you would normally, which is going to help you hit the wall faster, which is not a good thing. But outside of that, I tend to not get too much in the supplement game, mainly as well because I come from the background of sports science and the ethical side of things in terms of doping and anti-doping more than anything. The larger proportion of doping bans are a result of supplements gone wrong. You can look it up. You can see the sanctions on WADA and ASADA being the Australian one, USADA being the US, etc. There's all the independent national bodies, but then also WADA. You can see all the bans and the sanctions and who's got what and what the reason was for. Majority of the time, it's for something that was found in a supplement. And so particularly for my elite guys, I tend to just stay away from it. Unless I know it's guaranteed to be clean because it's coming from like a natural source. like things like if we're talking like beetroot juice and things like that, like you refine that, or the batch has been thoroughly tested and is approved to know that there is nothing in there that we don't want or don't need in that supplement. So even things like protein powders and stuff like that, I've started to move away from. Try and get it in my diet and try and do the right things in terms of the basics of nutrition, hydration, are going to give you more than what supplements will ever do. I think we rely too much on these fancy little tools and fancy little supplements and things like that as an industry. Do the basics well, and you're going to be 98, 99% of the way there. A little bit of a supplement could be a part placebo, could be a 1% gain, but is it going to make or break your race? Probably not. You could probably get by without them. So I tend to stay away from it. Personal side of things, more than welcome if you want to go and get involved in the supplement side of things and you want to go down that path, great. It's just something that as a philosophy, I tend to direct athletes away from, like I said, mainly from that doping perspective. It's so easy to have a tainted supplement that can lead to all sorts of things in terms of doping policy, but then also just general side effects of having things that you don't know are in your supplement as well, as a process of like going through the creation process or the factory process could be tainted with something else that was on that same production line. So I tend to stay away from it. So hopefully that answers that one. I know it's probably a bit disappointing. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those specific ones you listed. We've talked about caffeine before. I like caffeine. Everyone loves caffeine. I love good coffee and caffeine at the end of a race. But in terms of pre-race, I tend not to do anything too different other than hydrate adequately and eat appropriately at good intervals beforehand. Coming back to Tim, do you reckon there's any point? So we were talking before about broken foot, doing some base training on the bike as opposed to running because you can't run. Do you think there's any point doing a tempo equivalent? I mean, you could. Really, all we're looking at, and I guess the major point I want to get through to you is, as long as you're targeting different parts of the engine, I wouldn't just go and do just long and slow, because the top end and your ability to use oxygen at a higher rate, so your aerobic power up near VO2 max, is going to drop and decline if you just don't train it. And that's the same as your muscular endurance, your aerobic capacity is going to drop and decline if you don't do some long slow. So you might want to add in tempo equivalent. I don't think it's necessary. You can keep it a lot simpler than that and do more of that polarized approach where it's do some really high intensity short burst stuff, do some long and slow, and save the tempo stuff for your specific preparation. Yes, there's still a bit of an aerobic. There's going to be some aerobic benefit to doing things like tempo. There's a bit of a lactate tolerancy type effect as well, because there's a bit more lactate coming in the system, sure. But at the end of the day, we typically often prescribe tempo as a very specific, almost race intensity type session, or getting us used to running at a particular intensity for a period of time, rather than a very general maintain the engine, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't actually stress about it. If you wanted to, you could. I'm not saying no to it, but I think a smarter way to go about it is go really high intensity, really long slow. That'll preserve as much of your engine as you can. And then the specific stuff like tempo can come back in when you start to run again. That's the way I see it working a little bit more effectively and a little bit better. So hopefully that gives you a bit more insight there. But good question though, because I mean, if you have been doing quite a bit of tempo running, you're enjoying that, maybe you want to add in one of those bike sessions of tempo, maybe part of that. Are we back? I think momentarily the camera died there. So apologies if the stream went down just momentarily. The camera died. I had to swap the battery out. It's actually getting really, really hot. I'm holding this, and it's actually quite difficult hot. It is quite warm today. And I know the live stream, I'm just doing this off a GoPro when I do it. So as my webcam, if you like, it's a little bit clearer, a little bit nicer footage. The delay, I hope, wasn't too bad. Tried to do everything as quick as we could. I'm going to look into why. as I mentioned before, things like the membership and stuff like that on the channel, he helped me fix some of these issues. I'm still working through it. At the end of the day, I'm a sports scientist. I'm not great at sort of videography and things like that. So it's the type of thing that I do eventually want to upgrade the camera to a more suitable camera rather than a GoPro, because this is burning hot. If you actually felt this battery at the moment, it is on fire, because we've been live for the better part of an hour 10. So it does create a lot of heat in there because the camera's pushing quite hard. I do eventually want to get a slightly better camera that's not going to do that, which would be nice, because then we don't have drops in the stream like we just had. But I seem to have been able to fix it. That's good that we're back. Hopefully we didn't miss too much at the end of that last question. Let me know if we did, about the tempo side of things. In terms of the bike, as I was saying, mainly just do the long, slow, high intensity. That's going to be a better way to maintain as much of your engine. That was very weird. I'm a bit sort of disappointed that it cut out there for a sec. But for anyone watching on the replay, apologies. And for anyone who's still in here now, apologies for that going down. A little bit of technical trouble, but we're back up and running, so that's all good. What I might do anyway, because we do... that seems to be most of the questions that come through so far. If there's any others, I'm happy to take them. But what I might do is jump off the stream soon, just to allow the camera to cool down, because I don't want to completely fry it in terms of the GoPro. And I'm going to start looking into some better alternatives in terms of making sure that, and trying to keep the camera cool. I'm just feeling at the back here, the camera itself is quite hot, so that's never usually a great sign. If there is any final last questions, chuck them in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to send them through on a direct message on Instagram, which I'll pop down the bottom corner. Go jump across there. Go give us a follow. We're getting very close to 1,000 followers on Instagram too, which would be awesome if we can build the community over there as well and have people going back and forth. Would be great. Send your questions through directly is the easiest way. As always, if you haven't subscribed, or you know someone who's interested in the content and they haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Continue to grow this great community we've got. Really enjoy having everyone jump on these live streams, and also get their comments in and questions in through the comment section of the videos, watching the videos, jumping on Instagram, and getting across there as well. So what I might do is to save the camera and make sure that everything's okay. I'm going to end it there. Thanks to everyone who's joined in tonight. Great conversation in the chat. Awesome to have Sam join us as part of Team NJ Sports Science, and a few of our members join us in the chat tonight. Thanks for supporting the channel as always. Hope you enjoy the live stream and videos coming soon.